Right now, as you watch this on a screen powered by electricity, there are over 400,000 people in America who have never flipped a light switch in their lives. They don't use the internet. They don't own televisions. They don't drive cars. They have no social media accounts, no streaming services, no refrigerators humming quietly in the background of their kitchens. And here's the part that will bother you. They're not struggling. They're not suffering. They're not poor. They're one of the fastest growing communities in the entire Western world. Their population has exploded by over 130% since the year 2000. They now live across 32 American states and 3 Canadian provinces. They have 684 settlements, over 3,000 church districts, or in every 20 years, their numbers double. They are the Amish, and they didn't lose electricity. They looked at it, understood exactly what it could do, and said no, not once, not as a one-time decision centuries ago. They say no every single day, every single generation, over and over again. This is their story. And by the end of it, you might understand why. To understand why over 400,000 people in the 21st century still live without electricity, you have to let go of the first assumption almost everyone makes. They are not stuck in the past. They chose the past, deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what the modern world offers, and they keep choosing it every single generation. See, but most people hear the word Amish and they picture a simple group of farmers who somehow got left behind by progress. A quaint community frozen in time because they didn't know any better. People too stubborn or too isolated or too uneducated to catch up with the rest of America. But that picture is wrong, completely wrong. The Amish are not ignorant of the modern world. They know exactly what electricity does. They know what smartphones are. They know about social media. They know about Netflix, about artificial intelligence, about everything you take for granted. Their teenagers, yes, their own teenagers, are actually given a formal opportunity to leave the community and experience the modern world for themselves. They can drive cars, use phones, go to parties, live outside the rules. And after tasting all of it, 85 to 90% of them come back. They return to the candle, to the horse, to the hand-sewn dress and the wood-burning stove and the silence. That number is not a typo. Nearly 9 out of 10 Amish teenagers experience the modern world and voluntarily walk away from it. And that should make you pause, because it raises a question that almost nobody in the modern world ever thinks to ask. What if they're not behind us? What if they see something we don't? To understand why the Amish think this way, you can't start in America. You have to start in a place most people would never expect. You have to start with a massacre. In the early 1520s, while Martin Luther was shaking the foundations of the Catholic Church, another movement was forming in the shadows. Well, a group of radical believers in Zurich, Switzerland, came to a conclusion that would cost them everything. They believed that baptism, the most sacred ritual in Christianity, should not be forced on infants. It should be a free, conscious, adult choice. That single idea made them enemies of everyone. The Catholic Church condemned them. The new Protestant churches condemned them. Civil authorities condemned them. Because in 16th century Europe, religion and government were fused together. To reject infant baptism was not just a theological disagreement. It was an act of rebellion against the state. They called these believers Anabaptists, rebaptizers, and the punishment was death. Over several decades, nearly 2,500 Anabaptists were executed across Europe. The methods were deliberate and cruel. Some were burned alive at the stake in public squares, their deaths meant as warnings. Others were drowned in rivers, a mocking echo of the very baptism they believed in. Many starved slowly in stone prison cells. Others had their tongues clamped with iron screws so they couldn't preach to the crowds at their own executions. And then they were beheaded. The Anabaptists compiled their own book of martyrs called the Martyr's Mirror. It is over 1,000 pages long. It documents name by name, story by story, how their people were hunted and killed for refusing to surrender their beliefs. And this book still sits in Amish homes today. Families read from it. Children grow up hearing these stories. The memory of persecution is not ancient history to the Amish. It is a living reminder of what happens when you trust the outside world. And the survivors of this persecution didn't fight back. They didn't form armies. They fled into the Swiss mountains, into the valleys of Alsace, into rural corners of Europe where the authorities couldn't easily reach them. And this right here, is where the Amish soul was formed. Not in peace, not in prosperity, in terror, in hiding, in the absolute certainty that the world outside their community could not be trusted. They learned that survival meant separation, that connection to outside power, whether political, religious, or technological, was a trap that could destroy everything they held sacred. That lesson was carved into their identity with blood, and 300 years later, it still drives every decision they make, including the decision to refuse electricity. Now, you fast forward roughly 160 years from those early persecutions. It's 1693. The Anabaptist communities have survived. They found pockets of safety across Switzerland and the Alsace region of present-day France. But a Swiss-born Anabaptist leader named Jacob Amann believes something is going wrong. The communities are getting too comfortable, too willing to blend in with the world around them. The discipline is softening. The boundaries are blurring. Amann proposed radical reforms, more frequent communion, twice a year instead of once, the practice of foot washing during worship, in obedience to the example of Christ, stricter dress codes, no fashionable clothing, no trimmed beards, and most controversially, the enforcement of Meidung, social shunning of anyone who broke the community's rules and refused to repent. Shunning was the breaking point. Many Anabaptists saw it as too harsh. The movement split, and Amann's followers became a separate group, eventually known as the Amish. They carried this identity, this fierce insistence on separation, on discipline, on choosing community over comfort, across the Atlantic Ocean. In the 1700s and 1800s, wave after wave of Amish families landed in North America. They settled in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and beyond. They claimed land. They built farms with their own hands, and they organized their lives around a code called the Ordnung. The Ordnung is not a written document. It is an oral tradition, a set of understandings passed down through generations, and that governs every aspect of Amish life. What you can wear, how you travel, what tools you use, how you worship, how you raise your children. And the Ordnung made one thing absolutely clear. The community would not connect itself to the outside world's power grid. Not then, not ever. Now here's the part where most people get confused. And honestly, it's the part that makes the Amish far more interesting than most people realize. The Amish are not anti-technology. That is a myth, a complete misunderstanding. They are selective with technology, and that distinction changes everything. The Amish do not believe technology is evil. What they believe and this is the single most important idea to understand about them, is that technology, if left untamed, will quietly and invisibly destroy the things that matter most. Family, a community, faith, self-reliance, the bonds between neighbors. So instead of accepting every new invention the way the rest of the world does, automatically, eagerly, without question, the Amish do something almost no other society on earth does. They pause. They ask a question. Will this tool bring us closer together or pull us apart? That question is the filter through which every technology passes, and based on the answer, lines are drawn. Televisions, rejected outright, because television brings outside voices, outside values, outside desires into the center of the home, the one place that should be protected most. Radios, rejected. Same reason. A channel to the outside world that cannot be controlled once opened. Personal computers and the internet, rejected absolutely. The internet is, in Amish eyes, an open door into a world they spent 300 years separating from. Cars, rejected. And this one is important. The Amish don't reject the car because the engine is sinful. They reject it because of what it does to community. A car makes it easy to live far from your neighbors. It makes it easy to travel to distant cities. It expands your world. And in the Amish view, when your world expands, your local ties weaken. The people next door stop mattering as much. A horse and buggy, by contrast, keeps everything local. Your life happens within a small radius. Your community is physically close. You depend on the people around you, and they depend on you. But here's where it gets surprising. The Amish do use batteries. They use solar panels to charge those batteries. They allow gas-powered generators for certain workshop tools. They use propane for cooking and some heating. Some communities permit calculators, cash registers, and even copy machines, as long as they run on batteries, not on electricity from the public grid. Why does this distinction matter? Because the electrical grid is a connection, a literal cord tying your household to an infrastructure controlled by the outside world. You depend on it. You pay for it. You become part of a system that dictates terms you didn't choose. Battery power is different. It's local, self-contained, independent. You control the source. You control the output. It stays inside your world. To an outsider, this looks like hypocrisy. How can you reject the grid but accept a battery? How can you refuse to drive a car but hire a non-Amish driver when you need to travel far? But inside Amish culture, these are not contradictions. They are boundaries, carefully chosen, deliberately maintained boundaries that slow down the pace of change just enough to keep the community intact. The Amish don't want to stop time. They want to master it. So what does life actually feel like when you strip away every electrical device most people consider essential? Let me take you through a single day. The morning begins before dawn. There is no alarm clock, no phone buzzing on a nightstand. The body wakes to the rhythm of the season, earlier in summer, later in winter. The first thing you notice is warmth. Not from central heating, from a single wood-burning stove in the center of the house. This stove is the heart of the home. It heats every room evenly. It runs all day on a few armfuls of wood, and its top surface is always hot, always ready to boil water for coffee, heat a pot of soup, or warm a pan of eggs. There is no microwave. There doesn't need to be. The stove is always on. That same stove heats water for bathing. A bucket is filled from the hot water tank, cooled to the right temperature with cold water, and poured into a hanging bucket in the shower. You turn a small handle. Gravity pulls the water down in a steady, warm stream. It's not a luxury hotel shower, but it's warm, it's clean, and it works every single day without a single wire. Breakfast comes from the farm, eggs gathered that morning, bread baked the day before, by hand in the wood-fired oven, butter churned from the milk of the family's own cows, raw milk, thick and creamy, poured straight from a glass jar. After breakfast, work begins. For men, that means the farm, the workshop, or a trade. Amish men build furniture that sells for thousands of dollars to the outside world. They construct entire barns using hand tools and human coordination. They farm without tractors, using teams of horses to plow and harvest. For women, the morning means laundry, sewing, cooking, canning, gardening. Laundry is done with a propane-powered motor driving an agitator inside a metal wash tub. Clothes are cranked through a hand wringer, rinsed in a second tub, wrung again, and hung on a pulley line that carries them high above the yard. One woman can process a mountain of laundry, what would be 10 or 12 loads in an electric machine, in a single focused session. Clothing is handmade, every piece, dresses, shirts, trousers, coats, all sewn on a foot-powered treadle sewing machine. Patterns are shared between women. There are no clothing stores, there are no brands, there is no fashion cycle, and then there's food preservation, the part that amazes most outsiders. Without electric freezers, the Amish use ice. In winter, blocks of ice are cut from a nearby pond using horses and hand saws. These blocks are hauled to an insulated storage space, usually in the basement. Cold air from the ice is channeled through a vent into a wooden refrigerator. And that ice, harvested in January, lasts 12 months, sometimes longer. The pantry tells the rest of the story. Shelves stacked floor to ceiling with glass jars, canned peaches, green beans, corn, tomatoes, beef, chicken. Enough preserved food to feed an entire family for a full year without ever visiting a grocery store. This is not poverty. This is not deprivation. This is a 200-year-old operating system, refined, tested, and perfected, that runs entirely without the grid. But what the Amish have built goes far deeper than off-grid survival skills. They've built something that the modern world has almost completely lost. They've built trust. Consider this. The Amish have no commercial insurance, no health insurance, no home insurance, no life insurance, none. Instead, they have each other. When an Amish family faces a catastrophic medical bill, and these bills can reach tens of thousands of dollars, the community pays it, together. Without question, every family contributes what they can. No paperwork, no claims department, no deductibles. Well, when a barn burns down, and this happens more often than you'd think in communities that use open flame and kerosene, the community rebuilds it. Not in months, not in weeks, in days, sometimes in a single day. A barn raising is one of the most extraordinary things you will ever see. Dozens of men, sometimes over 100, arrive at sunrise. They work with hand tools, no cranes, no electric saws, no hydraulic lifts, just human strength, human coordination, and an unspoken understanding that today this family needs a barn, and by sunset they will have one. While the men build, the women prepare food. Long tables are set up in the yard. Mountains of bread, meat, pies, salads, and fresh baked goods appear. The children play. The elderly watch and advise. The entire community is present, and at the end of the day, a barn stands where there was nothing, built by hands. paid for by no one and everyone at the same time. This is mutual aid, not as a government program, not as a nonprofit initiative, as a way of life. And this is the thing electricity couldn't replace, even if they wanted it, because the barn raising doesn't work if people are scattered across cities connected by highways. It works because people live close, because they know each other, because they owe each other, because the community is small enough and tight enough that everyone's contribution is visible and everyone's absence is felt. The horse and buggy isn't just transportation, it's the architecture of trust. Now here's the part of the story that most people find hardest to believe. The Amish don't force their children to stay. When an Amish teenager turns 16, but they enter a period called Rumspringa, a German word that roughly translates to running around. During Rumspringa, the rules loosen. Teenagers are allowed to explore the modern world. They can wear jeans and t-shirts. They can adopt modern hairstyles. They can get a driver's license and own a car. They can install radios in their buggies. They can carry cell phones. They can attend parties where alcohol flows freely. They can date. They can experience the full spectrum of modern life. And this is not hidden. It's not shameful. The parents know. The elders know. The entire community knows. Because the Amish believe something profound. The choice to stay must be a real choice. If a young person joins the church without ever knowing what exists outside, their commitment is hollow. It means nothing. Rumspringa is the test. It's the community opening the door as wide as it goes and saying, go, look, experience everything, and then decide. Some teenagers go wild during Rumspringa. They party. They experiment. They push every boundary. Others barely change at all. They stay close to home, attend youth group gatherings, and never feel the pull of the outside world. But regardless of how far they wander, the numbers tell a story that defies every expectation the modern world has. 85 to 90% of Amish teenagers, after seeing the cars, the technology, the freedom, the unlimited choices, come back. They choose to be baptized. They choose the Ordnung. They choose the community. They choose the life without electricity, not out of ignorance, out of experience. And for the 10 to 15% who don't return, the ones who choose to leave, the cost is real. Because of the practice of shunning, Meidung, a baptized member who leaves the church, faces social separation. The community that held them their entire life steps back. They cannot share a table in the same way. Business relationships shift. The invisible safety net of mutual aid disappears. This is not cruelty for cruelty's sake. The Amish see it as tough love, a final call to return before the separation becomes permanent. The door is always open. Repentance is always welcomed. But the weight of that choice, to leave behind everyone and everything you've ever known, is enormous. And it's precisely that weight that makes the 90% retention rate so remarkable. They know the cost of leaving, and they still stay. There is one more story I need to tell you, because it reveals the Amish in a way that nothing else can. On October 2nd, 2006, a gunman walked into the West Nickel Mines Amish School in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He lined up 10 young girls against the chalkboard. The oldest was 13 and opened fire. 5 of the girls died. 5 others were critically wounded. Then the gunman took his own life. It was one of the worst school shootings in American history. And what happened next shocked the entire world. On the very same day, the same day their children were murdered, members of the Amish community went to the family of the killer, not in anger, not in rage, in forgiveness. An Amish grandfather of one of the murdered girls told reporters that very evening that the community held no hatred toward the gunman. Amish families attended the killer's funeral. They set up a charitable fund for the shooter's widow and children. They embraced the family of the man who destroyed theirs. Over 2,400 news stories about Amish forgiveness were published worldwide in the first week alone. The world could not understand it. How could they forgive so fast, so completely, so publicly, the murder of their own children? The answer is the same answer behind everything the Amish do: community, faith, discipline, and the absolute belief that holding on to hatred would destroy them faster than any bullet ever could. The modern world watched in disbelief. The Amish simply continued living the way they always had, and so we return to the question that started everything. Why? Why would over 400,000 people in the richest, most technologically advanced country on earth choose to live without electricity? The easy answer is religion, faith, tradition. But the real answer is deeper than that. The Amish made a bet over 300 years ago that community matters more than convenience, that slowness is not weakness, that limits are not punishment, they are protection. They looked at the electrical grid and saw a cord that would tie them to a system they couldn't control. They looked at the car and saw a machine that would scatter their families across distance too great to walk back. They looked at the television and saw a window that would let foreign voices reshape their children's minds. They looked at the internet and saw an ocean with no shore, and they said no. Not because they feared progress, because they had a different definition of it. For the Amish, progress is not faster. It is not more connected. It is not more efficient. Progress is, does this make our families stronger? Does this bring our neighbors closer? Does this protect the things that cannot be replaced once they are gone? And if the answer is no, then the technology, no matter how impressive, is not progress. It's a threat. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to live like them. You don't have to give up your phone or your car or your air conditioning. Well, but maybe, just maybe, you should ask yourself the question they've been asking for 200 years. Is this tool making your life better, or is it just making it faster? They've lived without electricity for over 200 years. Their population just crossed 400,000. 9 new settlements were founded just last year. Not a single one failed. They are not shrinking. They are not struggling. They are not stuck. They are growing. And they have absolutely no plans to stop. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. Because every video on this channel takes you inside a world where life followed a completely different path. Next week, we travel to a village that hasn't changed since the 1800s. No roads in, no roads out, and the people there wouldn't trade it for anything on earth. Right now, somewhere in Europe, a child is crossing a wooden bridge on foot to get home. No traffic light, no engine noise, no horn in the distance, just the sound of water touching old timber. A delivery is arriving at a front door. Not by truck, not by van, by boat. There are villages all over the world that call themselves historic, places that preserve one old church, one old square, one old street for tourists to photograph. But there is one village where the old world is not preserved behind ropes. It is still being lived in. The mail still moves over canals. The gardens still open directly onto the water. The houses still wear thatched roofs in centuries-old proportions. And for long stretches of the village, the road simply disappears. This is Geethorn. And if you look at it for the first time, or it doesn't feel real, It feels like a painting, a place too quiet to exist in the modern world, too gentle, too slow, too untouched, and yet it does exist. And the strangest part is not that it survived, it's that people still choose it, because this village did not become famous by chasing the future. It became famous by refusing to let the future flatten it. No highways cut through its center, no cars line its oldest lanes, no concrete apartment blocks tower over its canals. For more than a century, the basic rhythm of the place has remained almost unbelievably intact. And once you understand why, this stops looking like a beautiful accident. It starts looking like a decision, a very old one, and maybe a very wise one. To understand why this village feels like it stepped out of the 1800s, you have to let go of the first assumption most people make. This is not a museum. It is not a historical reconstruction. It is not a fake village built for visitors who want a pretty afternoon. People live here. They cook here. They raise children here. They carry groceries here. They trim hedges, repair boats, sweep bridges, and open curtains every morning over the same canals that shaped the village generations ago. And that matters, because a preserved village and a living village are not the same thing. A preserved village keeps the past on display. A living village keeps the past in motion. Giethoorn is in the Netherlands, in a low, wet landscape where water was never an afterthought. It was the ground truth. The village began forming centuries ago, where in a region of peat bogs and marshland where people came to cut peat from the earth. That peat was fuel. It had value. So the land was dug again and again, and the digging changed everything. Long, narrow cuts in the land filled with water. Pits widened into ponds. Pathways remained thin and fragile. And over time, the settlement that grew there did not organize itself around roads in the way most villages did. It organized itself around canals. Water became the street, and once water becomes the street, life arranges itself differently. A house does not face traffic. It faces reflection. A front yard is not interrupted by asphalt. It leans toward a canal. Movement slows down. Noise drops. Distance feels different. Even the architecture begins to cooperate with the landscape instead of trying to conquer it. And that is the first secret of this place. It did not stay old by resisting its environment. It stayed old by obeying it. The geography did part of the work. The people did the rest. If you arrive there today, especially in the older part of the village, what you see is almost absurdly gentle. Thatched farmhouses, arched wooden bridges, narrow footpaths, canals so calm they look like polished glass, lawns cut clean to the edge of the water, flowers climbing over facades, trees leaning down as if even they have learned not to rush. There are no ordinary streets running through the heart of it, not in the way your brain expects. And when the modern world disappears from view like that, something unsettling happens. You notice yourself. You notice how loud your own mind is. You notice how quickly you are used to moving, or how constantly you expect interruption. And then you start asking the obvious question: how did this survive? How did this not get paved over, widened, commercialized, standardized, and absorbed into the same template that swallowed so many other places? The easy answer is charm. The village is beautiful, so people protected it. But beauty alone does not save a place. Beautiful places are destroyed all the time, sometimes by neglect, sometimes by development, sometimes by success itself. No, the real answer is deeper than charm. Giethoorn survived because the very thing that made it inconvenient also made it defensible. Water. Water slows change. Water complicates machinery. Water limits scale. Water forces humility. You can widen a road. You can straighten a boulevard. You can bulldoze a field. But a canal village asks harder questions. Every change costs more. Every intrusion feels more obvious. Every modern convenience has to negotiate with a landscape that still remembers older rules. And so the village kept its shape long after so many others gave theirs away. Not because nobody imagined a different future, because the existing form kept proving itself. For generations, boats did the work that cars do elsewhere. Flat-bottom boats glided where trucks never could. Families moved goods by water. Neighbors visited by water. Children learned early that crossing the village meant bridges, footpaths, and canals, not speed, not lanes, not parking. This kind of life does something powerful. It makes the physical world impossible to ignore. You cannot fully abstract your way out of it. The weather matters. The season matters. The level of the water matters. The boat matters. The bridge matters. The space between houses matters. You remain in negotiation with place. And that, more than people realize, is what modern life has erased in so many parts of the world. Most towns now are built to minimize contact with reality. Climate-controlled interiors, standardized roads, artificial light, predictable surfaces, movement that ignores terrain. Convenience so complete, you barely register where you are. Geethorn does the opposite. It keeps reminding you, you are here, on this water, under this sky, in this weather, among these neighbors. That is not backwardness. That is intimacy with place. And once a community has that, it becomes much harder to replace with something generic. But the village did not remain unchanged simply because of beauty and water. It also remained unchanged because the Dutch, unlike many societies, have a very old relationship with managing landscape rather than pretending it doesn't exist. This is a country built in conversation with water, sometimes in conflict with it, sometimes in partnership with it, always in awareness of it. So a canal village was never automatically seen as a flaw that needed correction. It could be a functioning settlement, a coherent one, a proud one. That matters too, because many old places disappear when the culture around them stops believing they make sense. Geethorn survived partly because, in the Dutch imagination, a water-shaped landscape was not irrational. It was legible. It belonged, and so the village stayed itself, where its houses remained low and long, its roofs remained thick with thatch, its bridges remained personal, almost intimate, little arches connecting private lives to shared paths. Its movement remained quiet, not silent, quiet, and there is a difference. A village like this is not dead. It hums, a paddle dipping into water, a bicycle wheel on a narrow path, a gate opening, voices carrying across a canal, birdsong in hedges, a distant boat gliding under a bridge. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of proportion. Nothing is amplified beyond what the human body can comfortably hold. That may be the second secret of the place. Scale. Everything there is still scaled to the human nervous system. The bridges are for walking. The paths are for walking. The boats move at human speed. And the houses are built at human height. Even the views arrive in human-sized frames. A bridge, a garden, a bend in the canal, a line of reeds, a doorway, a roof line. Modern development usually breaks this. It supersizes everything. Bigger roads, bigger vehicles, bigger signs, bigger noise, bigger visual demands. Places stop being inhabited and start being processed. But in Geethorn, the body still understands the village immediately. It does not overwhelm you. It receives you. And that is why the place feels old in the deepest possible sense. not because every object is ancient, because the scale of life still matches the scale of being human. Of course, this is the point where people usually romanticize too hard. So let's be honest, life in a village like this is not frictionless. There are limitations. Transport is slower. Maintenance is constant. Waterways need care. Bridges age. Thatched roofs demand skill and money. Tourism creates pressure. Weather creates pressure. And preserving an atmosphere is not the same as living comfortably inside it every single day. But that is exactly why the village matters, because it is not easy, and it still persists. That tells you something. Places do not endure through inconvenience alone. They endure when enough people believe the inconvenience protects something worth keeping. In Geithorn, what it protects is not just an aesthetic. It protects a way of moving through the day. Imagine morning there, light rising over still water, a window opening onto a canal instead of a street. No line of parked cars outside, no engine starting beneath the bedroom, no rush of commuters slicing the dawn in half. Just layered quiet, a duck cutting through reflection, a bicycle crossing a bridge, a neighbor visible from a kitchen window, but not separated by noise. Even before breakfast, the village has already told you how to behave. Slow down, pay attention, don't force the day, enter it. And that tone continues. A person heads to work not by descending into traffic, but by stepping into the outdoors immediately. A child walks over a bridge and onto a narrow lane. A delivery slips along the water. A gardener trims the edge where lawn meets canal. The world there does not hide its infrastructure. Its infrastructure is the landscape. And because of that, daily life stays visible. One of the strangest effects of the modern world is how much labor it conceals. Food appears, packages appear, water arrives, heat arrives, waste disappears, movement happens, and most people no longer see the systems that carry their lives. In a village like this, that invisibility thins out. You see transport, you see weather, you see maintenance, you see the edges. That may sound small, it isn't. When the systems around you remain visible, gratitude has an easier time surviving. So does restraint. So does realism. And villages like Geithorn are built on restraint. Not deprivation, restraint. The bridges are enough, the footpaths are enough, the boats are enough, the houses are enough, the gardens are enough, the pace is enough. Modern culture is almost incapable of saying that word, enough. It only knows more access, more speed, more expansion, more throughput, more tourism, more development, more optimization. But there is a point where more stops improving a place and starts dissolving it. Geithorn seems to understand that instinctively. And that may be why visitors react to it so emotionally. Not because they want to live there forever. Most probably don't. But because for a few hours, they feel what it is like to inhabit a place that has not fully surrendered to acceleration. And once you feel that, even briefly, the contrast is hard to forget. Still, the village is not untouched by modernity. That would be a fantasy. It is known around the world now. Tourists arrive in huge numbers. Photos spread everywhere. The very beauty that helped preserve it also turned it into a global image, and that comes with danger. Because a village can survive centuries of weather and then be damaged by admiration. Too many visitors, too much commercialization, too much pressure to perform itself. This is how living places become stage sets, not through destruction, through overexposure. That is the paradox of Geithorn. The world loves it because it feels unspoiled, and the more the world loves it, the harder it becomes to keep it that way. So now the village lives inside a tension. It must remain open enough to survive economically and closed enough to remain itself. That balancing act may be the most modern part of its story. Not the old canals, not the old bridges, the discipline required to keep success from becoming erosion. And this is where the people of the village matter more than the scenery, because scenery cannot defend itself. Only a community can do that. Only residents can decide whether a place is still for living or only for looking at. Only they can enforce limits, maintain standards, repair houses properly, protect proportions, resist ugly shortcuts, hold the line when easy money offers to simplify everything. That is the part people miss when they see a beautiful old village. They assume survival is passive. It never is. It is active, constantly active. Someone keeps that roof traditional. Someone repairs that bridge instead of replacing it with something cheaper and uglier. Someone keeps the path narrow. Someone resists the demand for more signs, more concrete, more noise, more convenience, more capacity. Every old place that survives is being defended by someone, usually quietly, usually without applause, and often at personal cost. Geethorn is no different. The village still looks the way it does because generation after generation kept choosing continuity over speed. That choice is harder than it sounds, especially in an era where every system rewards scale and efficiency. An old canal village is not efficient, not by modern standards. It asks more of maintenance, more of patience, more of attention. And yet maybe that is exactly why it still gives something modern places cannot. Memory. Not memory as nostalgia, memory as structure. In a place like this, the past is not an exhibit behind glass. It remains embedded in the route home, the shape of a doorway, the angle of a bridge, the line of trees along the canal, the thickness of a roof, the way sound carries at dusk. You don't visit history. You move inside it. And when children grow up inside a place like that, they inherit more than property. They inherit continuity. They learn, without anyone needing to lecture them, that a village is not just real estate. It is a pattern fragile enough to lose and valuable enough to protect. That lesson is disappearing in much of the world because most people now grow up in environments designed to be interchangeable. One suburb looks like another. One retail strip becomes the next. One apartment block repeats the last. Nothing sinks roots deep enough to become irreplaceable. And when places are not irreplaceable, people stop defending them. Why would they? If every place is functionally the same, then movement becomes the only value. Cheaper there, faster here, bigger there, newer here. The soul drains out of geography. Geethorn stands as a rebuke to that way of thinking. It says place still matters. Specific place, not generic comfort, not abstract convenience. This canal, this bridge, this roof, this path, this arrangement of life. And if that sounds sentimental, consider the evidence. The world has spent more than a century trying to convince people that convenience is the highest good, and yet millions are drawn to villages like this with a kind of longing they can barely explain. Why? Because something inside them recognizes the cost of what was traded away. Not everyone wants to give up roads. Not everyone wants to live on a canal. But everyone, on some level, wants to live somewhere that knows what it is. A place that hasn't forgotten itself. A place that looked at the rush of the modern world, stood quietly by its own water, and decided that enough was enough. Right now, somewhere high above the rest of the world, a woman is opening her front door into the clouds, not metaphorically, literally. The valley below has already disappeared. The road ended hours ago. The power line stopped even earlier, and above the tree line on a mountain most people would struggle to climb once, let alone live on. One family is still making breakfast. A stove is burning. A kettle is hissing. Boots are drying by the wall. A dog is pacing in the yard. And beyond that yard, there is almost nothing. No shop, no school, no neighbors close enough to wave to, no traffic, no street lights, no easy way down, just rock, wind, sky, and a house that should have been abandoned years ago. But it wasn't, because one family stayed. And when I say stayed, I don't mean they came back for summer. I mean they never really left. While everyone else went downhill, toward roads, hospitals, schools, salaries, heat, signal, convenience, gravity, they held their ground above the clouds. And that raises a question that gets stranger the longer you sit with it. Why? Why would the last family on top of a mountain choose the hardest life available? Why wake up every day where winter can close the world in a single night? Why raise children where every sack of flour, every gas bottle, every tool, every medicine, every mistake has to travel up? Why remain in a place that modern life has already voted against? The easy answer is poverty. People hear a story like this and assume they had no choice, no money, no options, no way out. But that answer is usually too simple, because in places like this, hardship alone does not explain staying. If hardship explained everything, the mountain would already be empty. It almost is. And that is exactly what makes this family so fascinating. They are not surrounded by a thriving village. They are the afterimage of one, a living remainder, a final chapter, still refusing to end. To understand them, you have to understand the mountain first. And to understand the mountain, you have to forget the way lowland people think about land. Down below, land is something you own, a plot, an address, a market value, a place measured in access. Up here, land is not an asset. It is a relationship. It feeds you, tests you, protects you, punishes you, shapes your calendar, shapes your body, shapes your children. The mountain decides how you walk, how you build, how you sleep, how you store food, how you bury the dead, how long you can stay outside, how early you wake, how carefully you listen. And for centuries, entire communities accepted that bargain. They built villages on ridges and plateaus so high and exposed that from below they still look impossible. Stone houses clinging to slopes, terraces carved by hand, goats moving along paths that barely deserve the name, smoke rising from homes that seem less constructed than anchored. To outsiders, these places always looked romantic from a distance, until you imagine carrying water there in January, until you imagine a sick child there at midnight, until you imagine old age there. Then the romance begins to thin out, and reality takes its place. For generations, though, mountain villages survived because they were not isolated from a larger world. They were part of one. Hard places, yes, but functioning places. There were many families, many animals, many hands, many fires lit at dusk. People married there, worked there, argued there, buried parents there, raised children there. Life was difficult, but it was shared. And that changes everything. A hard life becomes survivable when it is collective. A mountain becomes livable when the burden is distributed. One family keeps sheep, another cuts hay, another repairs roofs, another knows herbs, another knows stone, another has sons strong enough to carry grain before the first snow. Community is what makes altitude human. And once that community begins to collapse, the mountain changes character. It does not become steeper. It becomes lonelier. That is what happened here. Not all at once. That is never how these places empty. No dramatic final exodus. No single day when everyone locked their doors and left. First came the road below, then the school farther down the slope, then jobs elsewhere, then television, then phones, then the first family that said, just for winter, then the second family that said, just until the children are older, then another who left after a bad harvest, another after an illness, another after a roof gave way under snow, another after the old parents died. And little by little, what had once been a village became a memory wearing the shape of a village. The houses remained. The paths remained. The stone walls remained. But life thinned out inside them. Windows darkened. Doors warped shut. Grass pushed through old thresholds. The mountain started taking back what people stopped defending. And then, eventually, there was one family left. The last light on the ridge. The last smoke from a chimney. The last dog barking at dusk. The last children, or maybe no children anymore. The last people who still knew which path stayed safe after rain. Which spring ran longest into late summer. Which wall needed reinforcing before winter. Which roof beam always creaked before a storm. That knowledge matters more than people realize. Modern life has made most people believe that survival is a matter of equipment, good boots, a generator, a four-wheel drive, an emergency radio, solar panels, maps. And yes, all of that helps. But in a place like this, survival is still mostly memory, inherited memory, stored not in devices but in habits. How high to stack firewood, how early to salt meat, how to read cloud shape over one specific ridge, how to hear wind shift before weather turns dangerous, how much hay your animals will really need, not in theory, but here, on this slope, in this winter. That is what the last family preserves. Not just a house, not just a lifestyle, an operating system, one that the mountain recognizes. And the strangest part is that from the outside, their life may look almost prehistoric. A stone home, a rough yard, water carried by hand or pipe from a spring, heat from wood, animals close by, supplies rationed carefully, a trip downhill treated like an expedition, not an errand. But if you spend enough time thinking about it, the more unsettling realization is this: their life is not primitive. It is specific. It is a life designed around one place instead of a system designed to work everywhere. And that difference is enormous. Most of modern life is portable. You can move it from one city to another without changing much. Apartment, job, supermarket, road, signal, delivery. Everything interchangeable. But mountain life like this is not interchangeable at all. It only works because it is rooted. The family is not simply living on the mountain. They are reading it, responding to it, negotiating with it every day. Morning starts before the sun fully clears the ridge. The cold is different up here. It is not just temperature. It has weight. It sits in the walls, in the floorboards, in the metal latch on the door, in the water bucket, in your first breath. So the day begins with fire, always fire, not for atmosphere, not for comfort in some vague poetic sense, for survival. Somebody wakes first, somebody feeds the stove, somebody checks the ash, somebody steps outside to read the sky. And even that tiny act, stepping outside, is not casual on a mountain like this. You don't simply go out. You prepare to go out. You feel the wind first. You listen. You look for ice. You scan the slope. Because weather is not background up here. It is authority. Breakfast is not rushed. Nothing meaningful on a mountain can be rushed without punishment. Tea, bread, cheese, eggs if the hens are laying, maybe yogurt, maybe soup left from the night before. Food is practical, dense, earned, and while the meal may look simple, everything around it has cost labor, wood cut, water carried, animals fed, milk taken, bread baked. Nothing arrives anonymously. That is one of the deepest differences between this family and the world below. Down there, life comes packaged. Up here, life arrives attached to effort, and that changes the emotional meaning of ordinary things. Heat means wood. Wood means time. Water means distance. Milk means tending. Snow means planting. Darkness means fuel. There is no invisible infrastructure hiding the truth of how life works. The truth is always in the room. After breakfast, the mountain begins asking for payment. Animals need checking. Fences need repair. A path needs clearing. Roof stones need adjusting. A tool needs fixing. A sack needs carrying. A spring needs inspecting. In summer, there is hay. Always hay. Mountain families do not simply enjoy summer. They race through it, because every bright day is a future winter day in disguise. Grass cut now becomes survival later. Wood stacked now becomes survival later. Cheese dried now becomes survival later. Every task contains another season inside it. That is how these places train people to think. Long term, physically, without slogans, without self-help books. The mountain teaches preparation because it punishes improvisation, and winter is where the truth of the life reveals itself. Anyone can admire a mountain in July. Winter is the real interview. That is when the road below becomes irrelevant. That is when paths vanish. That is when silence deepens into something almost total. Or that is when a single snowfall can redraw the map between the house and the outside world. The roof groans, the doors jam. The animals consume the stores you calculated months before. The hours stretch. The dark arrives early, and the family has to become enough for itself. That phrase matters. Enough for itself, because that may be the deepest meaning of why they stayed. People often assume the opposite of modern convenience is suffering. Sometimes it is, but sometimes the opposite of convenience is coherence, a life where everything belongs to everything else. The stove belongs to the woodpile. The woodpile belongs to the slope. The slope belongs to the weather. The weather belongs to the season. The season belongs to the animals. The animals belong to the family. The family belongs to the house. The house belongs to the mountain. That circle may be exhausting, but it is also complete. Modern life breaks that circle into fragments. You work here, shop there, sleep somewhere else, eat food from nowhere you know. Heat comes from a switch, water from a pipe, news from a screen, company from a phone, and before long your life functions, but no longer feels fully connected to place. That may be what this family refused to lose. Not comfort, meaning. Because living on a mountain like this does something the lowlands rarely do anymore. It makes consequence immediate. If you neglect the roof, the weather enters. If you waste daylight, the chore remains. If you forget to store enough, winter remembers for you. If you stop maintaining the path, the mountain closes it. There is no long delay between action and result. And strange as it sounds, many people would rather live under pressure than inside abstraction. At least pressure is honest. At least reality answers back. Of course, none of this means the life is easy. It isn't. Let's not romanticize what should not be romanticized. Isolation wears people down. Injury becomes dangerous faster. Pregnancy becomes harder. Old age becomes harder. Loneliness becomes heavier. Education requires sacrifice. Healthcare requires dissent. Opportunity requires leaving. And that last truth is the one that has emptied most mountain villages on earth. The children leave, not because they hate where they came from, because they understand the math. A future below is simply wider. More jobs, more schools, more people, more possibility. And once enough young people leave, the mountain enters a new stage of abandonment. It becomes a place of memory rather than a place of momentum. That is why the last family matters so much. They are not just surviving the elements. They are surviving after critical mass, after the village stopped being a village in the normal sense, after the blacksmith left, after the teacher left, after the baker left, after the neighbor down the path stopped opening his shutters. They stayed after staying stopped making practical sense. And whenever human beings do that, there is always a deeper reason. Sometimes it is land. The house is theirs. The pasture is theirs. The graves are theirs. Below the house, somewhere on that slope, are the people who made them possible. Parents, grandparents, maybe great-grandparents. People who cut the beams, laid the stones, survived winters even harsher than these. To leave is not just to change address. It can feel like betrayal, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet one, like speaking over the dead with your feet. Sometimes the reason is identity. If your entire life has been shaped by one mountain, who exactly are you without it? People underestimate how much location can become personality. Down below, the last family would not just be in a different place. They would become different people. Their skills would matter less. Their rhythm would break. Their authority would shrink. What the mountain asks of them is hard. What the valley asks of them may feel harder. To begin again in a world where you know less. Need more money. Depend on strangers. Follow clocks instead of weather. Rules instead of instinct. Noise instead of wind. That transition can feel less like liberation than exile. And then there is pride, not vanity. Pride in endurance. Pride in competence. Pride in being the kind of people who can still do what others no longer can. That matters. It matters more than comfortable people like to admit. The modern world likes to believe everyone is secretly trying to reach the same destination. More convenience, more access, more ease, more connection, more choice. But some people do not experience those things as freedom. They experience them as dilution. Too much dependence, too much noise, too much compromise, too much distance from what is real. For a family like this, staying on the mountain may not feel like deprivation. It may feel like clarity. They know what their life is for. That is rare, and rarity has its own power. Imagine evening there. The work slows. The wind changes. Animals settle. The last light drags across the ridge and then disappears all at once. Mountain dark is different from city dark. It is not lit around the edges. It arrives whole. The house tightens around firelight. One room warm. One pot simmering. Shadows along the wall. Wet clothes drying. Someone mending. Someone cutting bread. Someone looking out the window into blackness, thick enough to swallow distance. And beyond that window are the empty houses, the ones that used to glow too. That may be the saddest part of the story, not the difficulty, the absence, because the last family is never only living with nature. They are living with ghosts of ordinary life, a house that once held laughter, a yard once used, a roof no one repairs now, a path that still remembers footsteps. Abandonment is not empty. It is crowded with what used to happen there, and the family sees it every day, which means staying is not just practical, it is emotional labor. They are witnesses as much as residents, witnesses to a way of life narrowing into almost nothing, witnesses to a world that can no longer reproduce itself, witnesses to the fact that once the last family leaves, the mountain will change category forever. It will stop being lived in and become visited. That transformation sounds small. It isn't. A place inhabited and a place admired are not the same thing. A place inhabited has obligations, repairs, chores, animals, routine, memory and active use. A place admired has views, photos, nostalgia, distance. One is life. The other is scenery, and maybe that is why stories like this grip people so deeply. Because everyone can fail, even if they can't articulate it, that something precious vanishes when the last family goes. Not just population, not just tradition, a certain kind of human relationship with place. The relationship where land is not backdrop, not weekend escape, not content, but home in the oldest, heaviest sense of the word. The mountain does not care about any of this, of course. That is another truth. It will outlast the family. It will outlast the village. It will outlast the road below, and the government maps and the documentary titles and the comment sections and the romantic fantasies of people who have never had to survive a blizzard at this altitude. The mountain is patient. Human beings are not. That is why the last family feels so moving, because they are trying, in their small human way, to hold continuity against a force much larger than themselves. Not just weather, time, depopulation, modern gravity, the pull downward that has emptied so many ridges and plateaus across the world, and they cannot win forever. That is the heartbreaking part. No last family stays last forever. Eventually age intervenes, or illness, or exhaustion, or inheritance, or one winter too many. And when that day comes, the house will probably still stand for a while. The tools may still hang on the wall. The stove may still blacken the ceiling. The path may still lead to the door. But the life inside it, the actual knowledge, rhythm, competence, memory, smell, sound, repetition, that can disappear in a generation, sometimes in a season. That is why we should pay attention while such families still exist. Not because we all need to imitate them. We don't. Most people would not survive their life for a month, and many should not try. But because they reveal something uncomfortable about the rest of us. They reveal how dependent we have become on systems we do not understand. How far we have drifted from consequence, how little we now know about enduring a place instead of merely occupying it, and maybe most of all, they reveal that progress always takes something when it gives something. We speak constantly about what modern life has added: speed, safety, medicine, reach, convenience, and those things matter. They matter enormously. But we speak far less about what modern life has subtracted: patience, competence, interdependence, local memory, endurance, silence, a felt relationship with the ground beneath us. The last family on top of this mountain cannot stop the world from changing. They cannot refill the empty houses. They cannot turn their ridge back into a thriving village of 20 fires and 50 voices and children running every path at dusk, but by remaining they make one thing impossible to deny. Another way of being human existed here, and for one final moment still does. That matters. It matters because the world below is becoming more similar to itself every year. The same stores, the same roads, the same screens, the same rhythm, the same permanent low-grade hurry. And places like this mountain remind us that human life was not always organized around speed. It was once organized around survival, yes, but also around closeness, to weather, to labor, to family, to consequence, to the exact shape of one place on earth. You don't have to move to a mountaintop to understand the lesson. You don't have to reject modern life. You don't have to romanticize suffering. But maybe you should ask yourself a question while this family is still up there, keeping one small light alive where almost everyone else has gone dark. What in your own life is worth holding on to, even when the whole world is moving the other way? What have you surrendered not because it was wrong, but because it was hard? What have you traded for convenience without noticing the cost? The last family still living on top of this mountain is not just a story about isolation. It is a story about refusal. Refusal to let the map erase them. Refusal to let difficulty define meaning. Refusal to let an old way of life vanish without one final argument in its favor. And that argument is not made in words. It is made in firewood, in roofs repaired before snow, in animals fed before dawn, in paths reopened after storms, in water carried uphill, in one more winter endured, in one more morning above the clouds, and one day, yes, the mountain may finally go silent. The last chimney may stop smoking. The last gate may swing open in the wind and never close again. The last family may walk downhill and not come back. When that happens, people will say a village died, but that will not be the full truth. The fuller truth is that a particular agreement between human beings and a mountain came to an end. An agreement written not on paper, but in labor, in memory, but in stubbornness, in love, and until that final day arrives, as long as there is still one family up there, boiling water before dawn, while the valley disappears under cloud, the mountain is not abandoned, not yet, not completely, because as long as one door still opens into that wind, as long as one table is still set, as long as one fire is still lit, as long as someone still knows the path, the mountain is still being lived, and that, in the modern world, is almost unbelievable, which is exactly why it matters. Right now, somewhere far above the rest of the country, night is falling on a village the modern world can barely reach. No road climbs all the way up. No signal bars light up in anyone's hand. No ambulance could get there quickly if something went wrong. And when the weather turns, which it does, suddenly and without mercy, there is no easy way out. Just a footpath, a mule track, a memory of connection, and people who stayed anyway. That is the part that should stop you, because hardship is not unusual. There have always been hard places on earth. Frozen places, dry places, high places, places too far from the coast, too far from the capital, too far from the market, too far from everything. What is unusual is not difficulty. What is unusual is loyalty to difficulty. What is unusual is looking at a life with no road, no phone, no fast rescue, no backup plan, and saying yes. Not once, not by accident, every day, year after year. This is the story of a place where isolation is not just geography. It is a condition of life, a place where the mountain decides when you leave, when you return, and sometimes whether you return at all. A place where children grow up knowing distance not in miles, but in effort. A place where groceries are not errands. They are logistics, where medicine is not convenience, it is urgency, where winter is not a season, it is a test, and yet people remain, not many. That is important, because villages like this do not stay full forever. First one family leaves, then another. Then the young men go down for work and don't come back. Then the girls marry elsewhere. Then the school closes. Then the old houses begin to lean. Then silence moves in where laughter used to live, and still, somehow, someone stays. One family, two brothers, an old couple, a mother and her children, a grandfather who refuses to leave the house he built with his own hands. A place like this rarely empties in one dramatic moment. It thins, it fades, it becomes a question, and then finally, a mystery. Why are they still there? Why stay in a place the rest of the country has already walked away from? The easy answer is poverty. People hear stories like this and they relax into that explanation immediately. They had no choice, no money, no options, no escape. And sometimes that is partly true. But it is never the whole truth. Because if poverty alone explained everything, these places would empty much faster than they do. And some of them would never have survived this long in the first place. No, the real answer is always more complicated and more unsettling. Because once you understand why people stay in places like this, you start asking uncomfortable questions about why the rest of us left places like it. To understand that, you have to start with the land. Not with romance, not with drone shots, not with the beautiful idea of simple living, with the land. Because land this hard changes people. It trains them. A roadless village is not just inconvenient. It is organized around a completely different definition of time. Down below, time is managed by schedules, appointments, opening hours, traffic, delivery windows, battery percentages. Up here, time is managed by daylight, by weather, by the condition of the path, by whether the mule is strong enough, by whether the river can still be crossed, by whether snow arrives before you finish cutting wood, by whether the person coming back from the valley makes it home before dark. That changes everything. It changes how you think, how you store food, how you raise children, how you age, how you argue, how you forgive, how you plan. Because in a place with no road and no phones, life does not tolerate the modern fantasy that help is always 5 minutes away. It isn't. Sometimes help is a mountain away. Sometimes help is weather away. Sometimes help is tomorrow. And that makes people different. Not better, different. More deliberate, more alert, more dependent on each other. That last part matters most because isolation does not only produce hardship, it produces intimacy. One not the soft decorative kind, the binding kind, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who can carry you if you fall, who has extra grain if your stores run low, who will walk the path at night if your child gets sick, who knows how to reset a shoulder, who knows herbs, who knows storms, who knows which slope holds snow longer and which spring dries first. In modern cities, most people are surrounded by thousands of strangers and can still live like islands. In a village like this, that is impossible. You know too much about your neighbors, about their animals, their losses, their tempers, their strengths, the condition of their roof, the state of their pantry, whether they are worried, whether they are hiding worry, whether they need help and are too proud to ask. That is not just community. That is mutual exposure. And mutual exposure changes morality. It becomes harder to pretend your life has nothing to do with anyone else's. It becomes harder to disappear into privacy and call it independence. In a roadless village, independence is mostly a myth. Everyone depends on everyone. Even the strongest family depends on paths other people cleared, on walls other people repaired, on knowledge other people passed down. So when people ask, why do they stay? One real answer is this: because leaving does not only mean giving up a place, it means giving up a network of obligation that made life meaningful. That may sound strange to people raised to worship freedom as the absence of limits, but some forms of freedom are actually loneliness with better branding. A life where nobody needs you can feel convenient. It can also feel hollow, and villages like this understand something most modern societies have forgotten. Need is not always a burden. Sometimes it is glue. Imagine morning there. Before the sun reaches the rooftops, someone is already awake. Not because of an alarm, because the animals need feeding, because the fire died down, because yesterday's rain made the path dangerous, because if water is not carried now, it will be carried later in worse light, because mountain life does not care whether you feel ready. The day begins anyway. The house is cold first, always cold first. Stone holds night differently than concrete. It does not politely release it when morning comes. It keeps it in the floor, in the walls, in the metal cup on the table, in the air your lungs take in. So the first act of the day is fire. Not mood, not coziness, not aesthetics for a camera. Fire as function, fire as survival. Then comes water, then tea, then bread, then animals, then tools, then distance, always distance. Everything in a roadless place is farther than it looks. That shed, that spring, that pasture, that neighbor, that doctor, that shop. They may seem close from a map. They are not close in the body. Distance is measured in incline, in mud, in snow, in how much you are carrying, in whether you are going down empty and coming back loaded. That is why villages like this create a particular kind of strength, not gym strength, task strength, useful strength, the ability to carry, climb, repair, endure. And that strength is not evenly distributed by gender or age in the way outsiders sometimes imagine. Everyone works. While children work, old people work, women work, men work. The tasks differ, but the burden is shared because it has to be. If one person stops carrying their weight for long, the whole structure feels it. That is another truth of these places. There is less room for illusion. In modern life, systems hide consequences for a long time. Bills are delayed. Food appears under fluorescent lights. Packages arrive without revealing the chain of labor behind them. Water runs, heat runs, phones work. Most people can go entire days without confronting the actual mechanics of survival. Not here. Here survival is visible. It is chopped wood stacked against a wall. It is grain dried properly. It is a roof patched before the next storm. It is cheese hanging in cloth. It is medicine kept carefully because replacing it is not simple. It is one path up and one path down, and the knowledge that either can vanish in bad weather. That visibility does something to the mind. It makes life feel heavier, yes, but also clearer. You know what matters because the wrong things stop mattering very quickly. Fashion matters less when the slope is steep. Status matters less when everyone has seen you carrying water. Performance matters less when the winter is long. And screens, if you even have them down in the valley, lose their authority when your real world keeps making demands with both hands. That may be why places like this produce people who seem, from the outside, unusually calm. Not because they have easier lives, because their lives are too concrete for certain forms of anxiety. When the roof needs fixing, you fix the roof. When the goat is missing, you find the goat. When the grain is low, you think about grain. Reality disciplines abstraction. Of course, that discipline has a cost. It narrows life. That must be said honestly. A roadless village is not a poem. It is a constraint. Children there do not inherit endless options. The old grow vulnerable faster. Pregnancy becomes more dangerous. Injury becomes more dangerous. Education usually means distance. Ambition often means departure. And departure is where the story really begins to hurt, because every isolated village eventually enters a phase where geography stops feeling protective and starts feeling punitive. The same mountain that once kept invaders out now keeps opportunities out. The same footpath that once defined the village now limits it. The same silence that once felt sacred now starts to feel like absence. That is when the young begin leaving, not always because they want to, because they understand arithmetic. A future elsewhere is easier to picture. A salary, a school, a clinic, a road, a phone signal, an easier marriage market, a life where every emergency is not magnified by altitude and distance, and one by one, the village begins to drain of momentum. That is how these places die, not by catastrophe, by mathematics, fewer births, fewer returns, fewer reasons to remain. Then one day the village is still on the map, but no longer fully in time. Half the houses are shut, the school is gone, the path is still there, but it serves memory more than traffic. And those who remain are no longer just residents, they are holdouts. The final defenders of a way of being human that no longer makes practical sense to most people. So why do they stay? Sometimes because of the dead. That sounds dramatic, but it is true. The graves are there. The parents are there. The grandparents who laid the first stones are there. To leave is not merely to move. It can feel like severing a conversation across generations, like admitting the sacrifices of those who came before you now terminate in abandonment. That feeling is powerful, not rational in a narrow economic sense, but human beings do not live by economics alone. Sometimes they stay because the house is not just a house. It is biography made visible. This beam was cut by my father. This wall was repaired after the bad winter. This threshold was worn smooth by the feet of people whose names I still carry. Below in the town there may be better plumbing, better roads, better signal, but there is no continuity, no proof that your life belongs to a story bigger than your own comfort. And people need that more than the modern world knows how to admit. Sometimes they stay because they do not trust what lies below. That is another truth polite society avoids. Modern life likes to imagine that everyone secretly wants the same destination. More convenience, more need, more connection, more access, more choice. But for some people, the valley does not look like freedom. It looks like dependence, rent, bills, noise, bureaucracy, strangers, waiting rooms, rules written far away by people who have never carried wood a mountain path in winter. For them, the roadless village may be hard, but it is legible. The town below may be easier, but it is alien, and human beings will endure astonishing hardship to avoid a life that feels spiritually foreign. Sometimes they stay because the village, however difficult, still answers a basic human need more honestly than the world outside. Belonging. In the outside world, belonging has become thin, optional, performative. People join groups, leave groups, move, switch jobs, switch cities, switch identities, switch platforms. Everything is flexible. Everything is updatable. Everything is temporary. That sounds liberating. It can also make people feel infinitely replaceable. In a village like this, nobody is infinitely replaceable. If the strongest walker leaves, everyone notices. If the woman who knows births leaves, everyone notices. If the old man who understands stonework dies, or everyone notices. People are not abstract units. They are specific functions inside a shared life. Again, that can be suffocating, but it can also feel profound. To be necessary is not always a curse. Sometimes it is the reason a person can bear almost anything. And then there is one more reason they stay. The most difficult one for outsiders to understand. Pride, not vanity, not arrogance. Pride in competence. Pride in endurance. Pride in being the kind of people who can still live where others cannot. That matters. It matters in shepherd cultures, mountain cultures, island cultures, forest cultures, any place where survival still depends partly on character and not only on systems. A family that stays in a village with no roads and no phones is making an argument, not with speeches, with labor, with repetition, or with one more winter, one more repaired roof, one more journey down the path and back again, one more child raised in a place everyone said was finished. That argument says, you may call this impossible. We call it home, and home is a stronger force than comfort. Imagine evening there. The path is dark now. The animals are quiet. The valley below has turned into scattered lights so far away they may as well belong to another century. Inside the house, one room is warm. Always one room. A pot is on the stove. Wet clothes are drying. Someone is repairing a boot. Someone is cutting bread. Someone is listening to the wind and deciding what tomorrow will demand. And outside that small circle of firelight is the rest of the village. Empty houses, locked doors, collapsing sheds. You paths that still remember feet, but no longer receive them. That is the emotional burden of being the last ones. You do not only live with nature, you live with ghosts, not supernatural ones, ordinary ones. The ghost of children once running between houses. The ghost of women talking by the spring. The ghost of smoke from 6 chimneys instead of 1. The ghost of enough people to make isolation feel shared instead of total. That may be the saddest truth in the entire story. A village does not die when the buildings fall. It dies when the routines stop reproducing themselves. When no one is left to inherit the way back from the spring in fog. When no one is left to remember which wall always fails first under snow. When no one is left to know why the houses were built where they were. The last residents carry all of that. And then they know, whether they say it aloud or not, that when they go, something more than population disappears. A pattern disappears. A form of intelligence disappears. A relationship between human beings and terrain disappears. That is why stories like this matter. Not because we should all romanticize isolation. We shouldn't. Most people would not survive this life well. Many would hate it. Some would be destroyed by it. Roads matter. Medicine matters. Communication matters. Emergency access matters. Let's not pretend otherwise. But it is also true that the world loses something every time a place like this goes dark for the last time. Not because old is automatically good, because diversity in how human beings live is good, and we are losing that diversity. The world below is becoming more and more similar to itself. The same roads, the same stores, the same concrete, the same glowing rectangles, the same permanent urgency, the same dependence on invisible systems, the same lives scalable, movable, transferable, forgettable. Places like this resist that sameness simply by continuing to exist. They remind us that human life was not always built around frictionless access. Sometimes it was built around endurance, reciprocity, local memory, seasonal intelligence, consequences you could touch. They remind us that way out is not always the same thing as better life. Sometimes the way out is just the way into a different form of dependence, and sometimes staying put, however difficult, is not ignorance. It is philosophy, lived philosophy, the kind you cannot fake because weather will expose you. So when we ask, why do they stay? Maybe the better question is this: what does their staying reveal about us, about what we call progress, about what we call freedom, about what we have gained and what we surrendered without noticing? We gained roads, and roads are miraculous. We gained phones, and phones are miraculous. We gained access to doctors, schools, markets, information, rescue, speed, and 1,000 forms of relief that previous generations could not have imagined. All of that matters. All of that saves lives. But those gains came with losses too. Losses harder to count. Local skill, interdependence, silence, patience, attachment to place, the ability to read weather like language, the ability to live without instant backup, the ability to fail deeply, that your life belongs to one landscape and one community instead of to a network that could replace you tomorrow. A roadless village preserves some of that. Not perfectly, not romantically. At a cost, always at a cost, but it preserves it. And maybe that is why the last people there seem, to outsiders, almost unbelievable. They are not just surviving a hard place. They are preserving a form of human seriousness the modern world has mostly traded away. One where life is still shaped by necessity, yes, but also by loyalty. Loyalty to family, to land, to memory, to obligation, to a place that asks more from you than comfort ever will. No roads, no phones, no easy way out, and yet they stay. Not because they don't understand the world beyond the mountain, because they do. They know what the valley offers. They know what a road would change. They know what a phone would solve. They know what an easier life looks like. And still, when morning comes and the fire has to be lit, and the path has to be walked, and the animals have to be fed, and the clouds close around the village once again, they answer the place they were given. That answer is not convenience. It is commitment. And in an age where almost everything has become temporary, revisable, and replaceable, commitment of that kind feels almost radical. One day, of course, the village may finally empty. The last family may descend and never return. The final roof may collapse. The final path may disappear into grass. A map will still show a name, perhaps, but the life behind the name will be gone. And when that happens, people will say the same thing they always say, or that it was inevitable, that time moved on, that progress arrived. Maybe, but that is only half the truth. The other half is this: for as long as someone stayed, for as long as someone still carried water there, still mended fences there, still buried parents there, still lit a stove there, the village was not a ruin. It was a choice, a hard one, a costly one, a human one. And until the final door closes, until the final fire goes out, until the final footsteps leave the path for the last time, the place is still alive. That is why they stay. And that is why we can't stop looking. Right now, while most of the world is arguing about winter coats and traffic jams and whether the heating bill will be too high this month, there is a village in northern Greenland where winter is not a season. It is the structure of life, a place where the sun disappears for months, where the sea turns solid, where the air can punish bare skin in minutes, where food is not bought casually. It is hunted, stored, shared, stretched, and respected. And in that place, roughly 40 people are still living, not visiting, not researching, not filming for a week and leaving, living, raising children, repairing engines, feeding dogs, watching the ice, waiting on weather, enduring darkness long enough to make most people lose their sense of time. This is Siorapaluk, Greenland's northernmost settlement, about 200 kilometers north of Qaanaaq and roughly 1,362 kilometers from the North Pole. It is one of the northernmost inhabited settlements on Earth, and recent population figures place it at around 40 people. Visit Greenland, https://visitgreenland.com/destinations/Siorapaluk/ geonames, https://www.geonames.org/3831128. And if you hear that number, so 40, your brain almost refuses to accept it. 40 people is not a town. It is barely a hallway in an apartment block, barely one school classroom, barely enough for a wedding guest list, and yet 40 people are still holding a line against one of the harshest climates on Earth, which raises the question that matters more than the cold itself. How? How do 40 people survive a winter this long? How do they survive the darkness, the isolation, the logistics, the pressure, the silence, the repetition, the sheer physical seriousness of life that far north? And maybe the deeper question is this: why would anyone stay? Because when people hear about remote Arctic communities, they often imagine one of two things: either a fantasy, a beautiful white wilderness, northern lights above silent snow, dogs pulling sleds under stars, a pure and noble life untouched by the modern world, or they imagine misery, nothing but deprivation, nothing but danger, nothing but a frozen edge of the map waiting to be escaped. But the truth is always more difficult than fantasy and more interesting than pity. Places like this do not survive on romance, and they do not survive on toughness alone. They survive on systems, on memory, on discipline, on the fact that everybody in a settlement this small matters more than they would in almost any city on Earth. To understand that, you have to begin with the winter itself, not the postcard version, the real one. In the far north of Greenland, polar night stretches for months. In Qaanaaq, just south of Siorapaluk, the sun stays below the horizon from late October to mid-February, and even outside the strict polar night dates, winter dominates the calendar long before and long after the sun disappears. Explore North Greenland, https://north-greenland.com/204. Think about what that means. Not one dark evening, not a week of bad weather, months where daylight is reduced to a dim blue suggestion, months where morning and afternoon blur together, or months where your body has to keep believing in time even when the sky stops confirming it. That alone would be enough to break many people, because human beings are not built only out of muscle and bone. We are built out of rhythm. Light tells us when to wake. Light tells us when to stop. Light tells us spring is possible. Take enough of that away, and winter stops being weather. It becomes psychological terrain, and in a settlement of 40 people, there is nowhere to hide from it. No mall to walk through, no movie theater, no endless variety of restaurants and roads and distractions to dissolve the pressure. Just the same houses, the same shoreline, the same dogs, the same few people, the same sky, again and again. So how do they survive it? First, heat. Always heat. The first truth of Arctic life is that philosophy comes later. First comes warmth. If a house cannot hold warmth, nothing else matters. Family life, food storage, sleep, repair work, school, conversation, rest, all of it depends on an interior space where the body can unclench. That means fuel, maintenance, constant attention to the house as a living shell between human life and the cold outside. In much of the modern world, heating is passive. You press something. You pay for something. Warmth appears. In a place like Sierrapaluk, warmth is still deeply physical. It is planned, protected, never taken for granted. Second, food. This is where the modern imagination fails hardest, because most people assume survival in a place like this must mean living on scarcity alone. Oh, but Arctic survival has never been about random suffering. It has always been about knowledge of animals, knowledge of seasons, knowledge of ice, knowledge of storage, knowledge of when to travel and when not to. The people of Sierrapaluk are mainly hunters, and many are descendants of Inuit families whose culture was shaped by one of the most demanding environments on Earth. Visit Greenland, https://visitgreenland.com/destinations/Sierrapaluk/. That matters, because hunting in the Arctic is not a hobby layered on top of life. It is infrastructure. Seal, narwhal, walrus, fish, birds. Everything depends on timing, geography, experience, and conditions outsiders usually cannot read. The frozen landscape may look empty to us. It is not empty to the people who know it. It is a map of opportunities and risks. A place where one stretch of ice is safe and another is betrayal, where one weather shift means travel and another means death, where food is not simply out there, it is hidden inside judgment. That judgment is one of the real reasons the village survives. Not technology alone, skill, intergenerational skill. Because in places like this, a community is not just a group of people living near one another. It is a library of local knowledge stored in human beings. Who knows the dog routes? Who knows the shore ice? Who knows engine repair in cold that makes metal brittle? Who knows how long stores will last? Who knows how to read wind? Who knows what kind of snow means drift and what kind means crust? Who knows how to keep children safe without raising them in fear? That is not quaint knowledge. That is life support. Third, dogs. If you want to understand high Arctic settlements, you have to stop thinking of sled dogs as cultural decoration. They are transport, memory, movement, insurance. A settlement like this does not survive the long winter by pretending modern infrastructure exists when it doesn't. It survives by using the forms of transport that still make sense there. Snowmobiles matter, yes. Engines matter. Fuel matters. But in the far north, dog sleds are not obsolete nostalgia. They are resilience. A machine can fail. Fuel can run out. Engines hate cold. Dogs, if cared for, are alive in the system. They respond, they endure. They are one of the oldest Arctic technologies because they are not only transportation, they are adaptation made muscular. Fourth, storage. Winter this long is impossible without planning. That sounds obvious, but planning in modern life usually means digital calendars and grocery lists and monthly budgets. Planning in a place like this means calculating survival in matter, food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medicine, clothing, batteries, rope, tools. Everything has to be thought about before it is needed, because once the weather closes, "I'll get it tomorrow," becomes a dangerous sentence. The modern world is built around immediate replacement. Need something? Order it. Drive for it. Call someone. Track it. Complain if it's late. That mentality dies fast in the Arctic, not because people become saints, because reality retrains them. You learn to think ahead or the environment thinks for you. And the environment is much less forgiving. Fifth, each other. This may be the most important one. 40 people is small enough that everyone matters. That sounds sentimental until you really think about it. In a city, a person can disappear into scale. One more face, one more apartment, one more silence behind one more door. In a settlement of 40, absence has weight. If someone is ill, everyone knows. If someone's equipment fails, everyone knows. If a hunting trip is delayed, people notice. If a family's stores are low, that does not remain abstract for long. Tiny communities can be difficult. Everybody knows everybody's history. Everybody knows who is strong, who is stubborn, who is grieving, who is generous, who drinks too much, who works too hard, who can be counted on at 3 a.m. That kind of closeness can feel claustrophobic, but it is also one of the reasons people survive. Because when the environment gets serious enough, privacy stops being the highest good. Dependability becomes more important. That is one of the secrets of extreme places. They do not produce freedom in the modern sense. They produce interdependence. And interdependence, if the culture can hold it together, is stronger than convenience. Now imagine the daily rhythm. The house wakes in darkness, not metaphorical darkness, actual darkness, a dim hour that does not become day in the way lower latitudes understand day. Someone gets up first. There is always somebody who gets up first, to check the heat, to boil water, to step outside and feel the air, to feed dogs, to inspect snow, to look toward the sea and the ice and the horizon that is barely a horizon at all. Breakfast is not just breakfast. It is calibration. How cold is it? Who is going out? What needs fixing? What must be saved for later? What weather is coming? Can anyone travel safely? Can anyone not afford not to? The children in a place like this do not grow up with a fake sense of independence. They grow up seeing systems, seeing food arrive through labor, seeing weather rewrite plans, seeing the adults around them make judgments with real consequences. That does something to a person. It teaches seriousness early, not necessarily sadness, seriousness. And seriousness is one of the invisible tools of survival, because the longest winter is not survived through drama. It is survived through routine, through many uncinematic choices made correctly. One more meal prepared, one more seam repaired, one more engine checked, one more forecast respected, be one more unnecessary trip not taken, one more risk postponed. That is what endurance really looks like, not heroism, discipline. Of course, none of this means the life is easy. It isn't. Let's not insult people in remote communities by turning their difficulty into aesthetic content. There is loneliness here. There is danger here. There is grief here. There are limits here that people in modern cities barely have to think about. Healthcare is harder. Supplies are harder. Education involves distance. Opportunity involves leaving. And that is where villages like this usually begin to thin out. Because the Arctic does not only test your ability to survive, it tests your reasons to remain. Why stay where the dark is this long? Why stay where the number of neighbors can be counted on your fingers twice over? Why stay where almost every form of modern life becomes more complicated? The answer is not one thing. It is never one thing. Part of the answer is ancestry. Many of the people in Siorapaluk descend from Inuit families whose presence in the region is tied to some of the last Inuit migrations from what is now Nunavut into Greenland. Visit Greenland. https://visitgreenland.com/destinations/Siorapaluk/. That means people are not just living in a cold place. They are living inside continuity, inside a chain of memory, inside a geography their families did not stumble into by accident. That matters, because modern life tends to assume people will always move toward comfort if given the chance. But human beings are often pulled more strongly by meaning than by comfort. Sometimes what looks irrational from outside feels like coherence from within. Part of the answer is competence. In a city, many forms of skill become invisible. In the Arctic, skill becomes identity. Can you travel safely? Can you read conditions? Can you fix what breaks? Can you feed your family? Can you stay calm when the weather goes wrong? These are not lifestyle extras. They are the architecture of dignity. And people do not give up dignity lightly. Part of the answer is that leaving has a cost too. That is what outsiders often miss. They talk as if departure is simply escape, as if there is a painless ladder from hard life into easy life. There isn't. To leave a tiny Arctic settlement is not just to gain services. It is to lose a world that knows who you are, to lose fluency in a landscape that once made sense, and to move from being necessary to being anonymous, to exchange one set of hardships for another. And many people will endure extraordinary physical difficulty to avoid spiritual displacement. That may be the deepest reason they stay. Not because the winter is easy, because the alternative is not as simple as we imagine. Now imagine the middle of it, the true center of the long winter, weeks into darkness, the novelty gone, the beautiful photos gone, the mood harder to maintain. This is the part documentaries often skip past too quickly, because this is the part that is repetitive, and repetition is difficult to film. But repetition is the reality. The same doors opening into cold, the same dogs needing food, the same equipment needing care, the same bodies needing rest, the same minds needing steadiness, the same few people needing to remain livable to one another inside a place with very little room for escape. That might be the hardest challenge of all. Not the temperature, not the wind, the social pressure of smallness. How do 40 people survive the world's longest winter? Partly by surviving each other, by knowing when to help, when to leave someone alone, when to share, when not to push, when to laugh, when not to talk too much. Tiny communities do not survive only because they are strong. They survive because they develop emotional techniques for remaining a community under stress. That is just as important as fuel, just as important as food, and maybe more fragile, because once the social fabric frays in a place like this, there is no larger system nearby to catch you. That is why rituals matter. Meals matter, shared work matters, language matters, humor matters, stories matter. In long winters, people are kept alive not only by calories, but by meaning. That is true in every harsh environment humans have ever inhabited. You cannot endure indefinitely for no reason. You need a story that explains why the burden is worth carrying. In Siora Paluk, that story is not abstract. It is written into the place itself, into the dogs, into the hunts, into the families, into the fact that the settlement still exists at all. The village is an argument, not in words, in continuation. It says, human beings can still live here, human beings who remember how, human beings who have not surrendered the high Arctic completely to weather stations, military maps, and passing outsiders. That matters. It matters because the modern world keeps becoming more similar to itself. The same roads, the same stores, the same glowing rectangles, the same dependence on vast invisible systems. And places like this remind us that not all survival is outsourced. Some of it is still local, embodied, specific. some of it still belongs to people who know one stretch of coast so well that it becomes almost an extension of thought. One more thing. When the sun finally returns, people in northern Greenland greet it. That fact matters more than it seems, because it tells you something about what winter really is. Winter here is not just something endured passively, it is something crossed. And the return of the sun is not just astronomical, it is emotional, communal, proof that time did not stop, a proof that the village made it through again. Explore North Greenland, https://north-greenland.com/204. That again is everything, because survival in the longest winter is not a one-time triumph. It is seasonal, repeated, earned over and over, and each year the question is asked again by the land itself. Are you prepared? Are your stores enough? Are your houses strong enough? Are your engines working? Are your dogs fed? Are your judgments sound? Are your relationships intact? Are your reasons for staying still stronger than the reasons for leaving? For roughly 40 people in Siorapaluk, the answer, somehow, is still yes. Not because the winter has become easier. Not because modern life solved everything. Not because isolation is beautiful, but because they built lives that still make sense there. Lives tied to one place, one culture, one climate, one set of skills, one shared seriousness about what it takes to endure. That is how 40 people survive the world's longest winter. They do not conquer it. They do not romanticize it. They organize around it. They respect it. They feed each other through it. They remember through it. They work through it. They wait through it. And when the sun finally comes back over the edge of the world, they are still there. Still small. Still remote. Still almost unbelievable. And maybe that is why stories like this stay with us. Because beneath the ice and the darkness and the logistics and the Arctic distance, they force us to confront a deeper question. What actually makes human life durable? Not comfortable. Durable. Is it infrastructure? Sometimes. Is it technology? Of course. Is it planning? Yes. But beyond all of that, it may be something older. A reason to remain. A culture that still means something. A set of skills the world has not yet made irrelevant. A community small enough that people still matter in full scale. 40 people, months of darkness, one of the harshest inhabited edges of the planet. And still, every year the village answers winter the same way. Not with speeches, not with drama, with dogs fed, stoves lit, food shared, children raised, ice watched, and one more season survived.